The flight was smooth, until it wasn't. Passengers settled into their seats, the hum of the engines filling the cabin, when suddenly voices rose in tension. A flight attendant, with an air of authority, marched down the aisle toward a well-dressed black passenger, her expression sharp. "Sir, you need to move," she snapped, her voice carrying over the murmurs of nearby travelers. The man calmly looked up, confused. "Excuse me," she huffed. "You don't belong here." Without waiting for a response, she raised a hand. Then came the slap. Gasps echoed through the plane as the impact landed. Shocked silence followed. Then, with an almost eerie calm, the man adjusted his cufflinks and met her glare. "I don't belong here." He let the words hang in the air. Because what she didn't know, what would change everything, was that this wasn't just any passenger. He owned the plane. The flight attendant stood frozen, the slap still echoing in the air. The other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of what to do. The man didn't seem angry. No, he seemed oddly calm. But there was something in his eyes that made everyone uneasy. His presence felt different. The attendant's face turned pale as she stared at him, realizing her mistake. This wasn't just a regular businessman or a flustered traveler. She had no idea who she had just slapped. "I'm sorry," she muttered, her voice trembling now. But the man didn't react. Instead, he calmly reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, tapping it with precise fingers. A few moments passed in tense silence before a notification pinged across the screen. The attendant's eyes widened in shock as the words popped up. "You are currently aboard my private jet." What had she just done? The cabin felt suffocating now. The flight attendant tried to regain her composure, but it was as if the weight of her mistake had pressed down on her chest. She forced a smile, but it came out more like a nervous twitch. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The passengers were all watching, their eyes shifting between her and the man, who hadn't moved an inch. In the back of the plane, a businessman exchanged glances with a colleague, his eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "Who is he?" he whispered, his curiosity now taking over. How could she not know who he is? The man didn't respond. He simply tapped on his phone, seemingly lost in thought. But there was an unmistakable aura of power around him, something that made even the seasoned crew members uneasy. No one had spoken a word to him before the incident. He wasn't part of the usual VIP crowd, not someone they had been briefed on. As the flight attendant fidgeted, her thoughts spiraled. She had seen him in the airport earlier, standing alone in a corner, not drawing attention. But now, after what had just happened, she realized how wrong she had been to underestimate him. It was as if she had made an enemy of someone who could destroy her career with a single word. But the tension wasn't only on the plane. Outside, in the cockpit, the captain felt a strange pull of concern. He had been told to expect a standard passenger, no special treatment, no extra security. Yet here was something that felt different, unsettling. His fingers hovered over the intercom button. Should he call for assistance? Should he verify the identity of the man? Just then, the plane jolted, a sudden turbulence shaking the cabin. The passengers gasped, and the flight attendant stumbled, grabbing the nearest seat for balance. The man didn't flinch. He remained seated, his face unreadable, but a subtle smile tugged at the corner of his lips. The turbulence subsided as quickly as it came, but the unease remained thick in the air. The flight attendant stood still, heart pounding, watching the man as he finally set his phone down and looked up at her. "Do you think you could try to be civil?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost patronizing. "Or should I take this up with your supervisor?" The words hung heavy in the air, and she could feel every passenger in the cabin leaning in, waiting for her response. The tension in the cabin was unbearable. The flight attendant's heart raced as the man's words echoed in her mind. "Take this up with your supervisor." She wasn't sure if he was serious or if he was testing her, but everything inside her screamed that this was no ordinary passenger. Around her, the passengers had begun to whisper amongst themselves. their curiosity now turning into suspicion. Who was this man? Why hadn't anyone heard of him? What was going on? In the cockpit, the captain's unease grew as he glanced at the blinking lights on his panel. Was everything truly all right? Something didn't feel right. His hand hovered near the radio, but he hesitated. He had no reason to call for a diversion, but a gut feeling told him that something was about to explode. The flight attendant slowly moved toward the man, the cold sweat on her palms, making it hard to grip the armrest in front of her. She cleared her throat, trying to steady her shaking voice. "Sir, I am sorry for what happened." "Don't apologize to me," he interrupted, his gaze cold. "Apologize to yourself for the choice you just made." She paused, her stomach dropping. The look in his eyes sent a chill through her. He was no longer playing the role of an annoyed passenger. He was in control now, and she could feel the power shift in the air. She swallowed hard, but her words caught in her throat. How was she supposed to fix this? Without warning, the plane dipped again, harder this time, sending the passengers into a brief panic. The lights flickered, and the overhead compartments rattled as though the plane were about to break apart. The flight attendant grabbed the nearest seat, her body jolting with the force of the turbulence. Through the chaos, she caught a glimpse of the man. He remained unnervingly calm, his eyes fixed on her, almost amused by the rising chaos. "Don't worry, it's just a little shake-up," he said casually. "But you should know, I don't take slaps lightly." The warning hung in the air, and for a split second, she wondered if he was behind the turbulence, if somehow he had control over more than just the situation. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom, but it was distant and garbled, as if the plane were losing connection. Something was happening, something none of them could explain. As the flight attendant looked around, she realized they were all trapped in the dark with no way of knowing what came next. The turbulence slowly began to settle, but the unease remained, lingering in the air like an unspoken threat. The flight attendant glanced nervously at the other passengers, many of whom were now glued to their screens or fidgeting in their seats, but none dared to speak up. They were all feeling it, the tension, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. Just when it seemed like the storm had passed, the intercom crackled again, but this time it wasn't the captain's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," a calm, unfamiliar voice echoed through the cabin. "This is your captain speaking. Or, should I say, *former captain.'" The words hit like a punch to the gut. The passengers exchanged nervous glances. Had the captain been replaced? Was someone else in control of the plane? The flight attendant's eyes widened in shock as she saw the man slowly stand up from his seat. He walked toward the front of the cabin with deliberate, measured steps, and suddenly it hit her. This was no ordinary passenger. She had underestimated him. Before she could say anything, the man's voice rang out, cold and commanding. "I'm afraid you've all been misinformed. The captain, well, let's just say he won't be flying us anymore. I've taken over now." A wave of fear swept through the cabin, and the tension was unbearable. The passengers were starting to panic, shifting in their seats, some even standing up in confusion. But the man didn't flinch. His demeanor hadn't changed. He seemed more confident than ever, even as the entire plane seemed to tip on the edge of chaos. And then the intercom crackled once again. But this time, the voice was far more chilling, sending a cold shiver down the flight attendant's spine. "Please remain calm," the voice said. "This is not a hijacking. This is something else." It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. The voice was eerily calm, almost too calm. And then came the next bombshell. "We are currently flying over restricted airspace." At that, the entire plane seemed to freeze. Restricted airspace. What did that mean? And who was this man really? The plane's interior was suffocating, the air thick with anxiety. The passengers were on edge, whispering to each other, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding around them. The flight attendant's heart raced as she stared at the man, standing near the front of the cabin, an unsettling calm in his eyes. Restricted airspace. Someone finally asked, their voice trembling. "What does that mean?" The man didn't answer immediately. He was watching the monitors near the cockpit, his expression unreadable. But when he turned to face the passengers, his gaze was sharp and precise. "It means," he began slowly, "we're not just any plane anymore." A chill ran through the cabin. The flight attendant felt the weight of his words pressing on her chest. She stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. "What do you want from us?" He smirked. "Nothing from you, but everything from your system." The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. He wasn't after money or fame. He wasn't just a regular passenger who'd made a bad decision in the heat of the moment. He was here for something bigger, something far more dangerous. Just as the tension reached its peak, a loud asterisk bang asterisk echoed through the cabin. The lights flickered again, plunging them into darkness for a moment before returning, dimmer than before. The man's face hardened. "Now it begins." Suddenly, the intercom flared to life again, but this time it wasn't the voice of the captain. Instead, it was a distorted, deep growl that sent a wave of terror through the cabin. "This is command. We have full control. Prepare for immediate landing." The man turned sharply, his eyes flashing with the recognition of a new player in the game. The flight attendant felt the ground beneath her shift as the plane started to descend rapidly, the pressure increasing. And then, in a moment of pure chaos, the final twist hit. The cockpit door burst open, and the real captain, disheveled and clearly in distress, rushed into the cabin. He was disoriented, almost panicked. He's controlling the plane remotely. The man laughed, a deep, unsettling sound. "You really thought you were in control. I've been planning this for years." But just as the plane seemed to plunge further into the unknown, the system shut off abruptly, and everything fell silent. The lights went out. The monitors went dead. The engines slowed. Everything stopped. For a heartbeat, there was nothing, no sound, no movement. The passengers were frozen, their breath caught in their throats. And then, just before the final descent, a single text message blinked across the screens. "You've been part of the test. Welcome to the future." Before anyone could react, the world outside the windows disappeared, the plane dropping into what seemed like an endless void. The flight attendant closed her eyes, not knowing whether she was about to fall into oblivion or something far worse. Suddenly, the darkness lifted, and the plane jolted back to life. The engines rolled back into action, and the lights flickered on, revealing a calm sky outside the windows. It was as if nothing had ever happened. The passengers looked around in confusion, unsure whether they had just dreamed it or if they had truly been part of something far more sinister. The man, now seated quietly again, glanced at the flight attendant. There was no malice in his eyes, only the weight of something far beyond the ordinary. "Enjoy the rest of your flight," he said softly, as if nothing had happened. As the plane resumed its course, the captain, still shaken but regaining his composure, took the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the unusual circumstances. We'll be landing shortly, but please remain calm. This was an experiment. Your safety is our priority." The flight ended, but the questions lingered. Who was he? What had really happened? And why? The answers would remain a mystery, but one thing was clear: the future was coming faster than they could have ever imagined.